Usually when we talk about medical diagnosis, there's this expectation of absolute, like, flawless precision.
Oh, yeah, for sure.
It feels like structural engineering. You fall off a bike, you break your arm, the x-ray goes up on the light board, and it shows that jagged white line.
Right, the doctor just points a pen at it and says, there it is. That is the problem.
Exactly. It's so concrete.
It is binary. It's either broken or it's not broken, and there is something incredibly comforting about that, I think. We naturally gravitate toward things that can be made visible, right? Things we can neatly categorize and just put into a box.
But then you step into the world of storytelling, you try to analyze fiction, and suddenly that x-ray machine is, well, it's completely useless.
Literally useless.
We're looking at a structural landscape that is honestly just incredibly murky. Because, think about it, we consume hours and hours of television every single week.
Oh, absolutely.
We read these towering stacks of novels on vacation. We binge watch entire franchises in a single weekend. And yet,
if someone stops you and asks how the story actually works on a mechanical level, it feels like magic. It feels totally unquantifiable.
Exactly. Which is why I was so entirely captivated when I came across this book recently. It's called The Trope Thesaurus by Jennifer Hilt.
Such a good book.
Right. She's a USA Today bestselling author, and she essentially looked at that murky, unquantifiable magic of storytelling and, like, decided to build an x-ray machine for it.
She really did. I mean, she created a comprehensive structural anatomy textbook for fiction.
Yeah.
She takes these massive, sweeping genres, romance, mystery, hardcore sci-fi, epic fantasy, and she systematically breaks down the hidden structural gears powering them.
And those gears have a specific name. They are called tropes. And that is the core mission of our deep dive today.
Right.
We are going to decode those hidden structural gears that power every single movie, book, and television show you have ever loved.
Because once you understand how Hilt categorizes and deploys these tropes, you basically elevate yourself.
Yeah, from being just a passive consumer of media.
Right, someone just sitting on the couch letting the story wash over it.
Exactly. You go from that into a storytelling architect. You start seeing the matrix.
And it's a profound shift in perspective. You really can't unsee it once you know what to look for.
Oh, I am already ruining television for myself in the best possible way. I'm like pausing shows and pointing at the screen.
I do the exact same thing.
And I promise you, by the end of this deep dive, you are never going to watch a Netflix series or, read a paperback thriller the same way again.
Never.
We are going to dig into the psychology of why we secretly root for horrifying villains. We're going to uncover why a secret baby is considered the absolute ultimate weapon a writer can deploy.
That part is so fascinating.
It really is. And I think this is my favorite part. We'll figure out why an armored polar bear in a fantasy novel is actually just a classic hard-boiled detective trope wearing a very clever disguise.
That armored polar bear is such a perfect entry point into this. But before we get to the bear, we really have to clear up a massive misconception.
Yeah, for sure.
We have to define what a trope actually is because the word has been hijacked.
It really has. I think a lot of people hear the word trope and they instinctively roll their eyes.
Totally.
They assume you were talking about lazy writing. They think of daytime soap operas or predictable romantic comedies where the career woman drops her folder of important papers and the handsome architect helps her pick them up.
Right, the classic meet-cute people conflate trope with cliché.
Yes, exactly. Yeah. So walk me through the difference. If I'm reading a script, how do I spot the dead end versus the potential?
Well, they get conflated all the time, and it drives structural writers crazy. Hilt gives us a very precise definition to work from. She defines a trope as a convention or a device that establishes a predictable representation of a character, a setting, or a scenario.
Okay.
But the crucial distinction she draws is between a cliché, which is a dead end, and a trope, which is raw potential.
So, give me an example.
Let's use a very common archetype, the spoiled rich girl.
Okay, yeah.
If a writer drops a spoiled rich girl into a scene, and all she does is act inexplicably bratty, complain about her expensive shoes getting dirty, and roll her eyes at the protagonist.
That's a cliché.
That is a cliché. It is an end product with absolutely no development. She never changes. She doesn't impact the plot in any meaningful way other than just, being mildly annoying.
Right.
There is no manipulation of the storyline. It's completely flat.
Right. She's just set dressing.
Yeah.
A cardboard cutout of a human being.
Exactly. But a trope is not a cardboard cutout. A trope is the raw material. It is the clay. So what happens when you take that exact same spoiled rich girl concept, that universally recognized raw material,
Okay.
and instead of just leaving her in the background, you give her a highly specific goal, deeply personal motivations, and you throw massive conflict in her way? You don't have a cliché anymore.
What do you have?
You have Elle Woods in Legally Blonde.
Oh, man, that is brilliant.
Right. Think about it. Elle Woods begins as the ultimate manifestation of the spoiled rich girl trope.
The pink wardrobe, the tiny dog.
The tiny dog, the obsession with a superficial relationship. The audience recognizes a starting point instantly, which makes them comfortable. They think they know exactly how this character operates.
Yeah, you feel like you've seen her a million times.
But the magic, the twist, is what hooks them. The writer takes that comfortable expectation and completely shatters it by layering in immense character depth, a rigorous intellect hidden beneath the pink outfits, and an unstoppable drive.
Wow.
That is what transforms a tired stereotype into a powerful, iconic trope.
I love that. The audience needs the familiar starting point so they know where to stand, but then you pull the rug out from under them.
Exactly.
And Hilt has this fantastic anecdote in the source material about Philip Pullman's massive fantasy novel, The Golden Compass.
Oh, yeah.
This is a book she read almost 20 years ago, and she talks about being completely, overwhelmingly swept away by it, like she would read it every single year.
It's an incredible book.
But as a writer herself, she was initially paralyzed by how good it was. She looked at this sprawling, imaginative universe and thought, Philip Pullman is a genius who weaves pure magic out of thin air, and I have absolutely no idea how he did this.
It's a very common feeling when you encounter a masterpiece. You look at it and assume it was just born whole, you know.
Right.
You think the creator has access to some divine inspiration that regular people just don't possess.
Right. So she reads it a second time, still feels slightly depressed by the sheer magnitude of the world building.
Oh.
But on the third read, she forces herself to put down the emotional experience of the story and pick up her analytical tools. She starts taking rigorous notes.
Right, she starts diagramming it.
Exactly.
Yeah.
She's underlining, writing in the margins, desperately trying to figure out the architectural magic of the book. And when she stripped away the breathtaking prose, the parallel universes, and the intricate lore, she found something incredibly validating.
She found standard ideas, the exact same foundational building blocks you would find in Grimm's fairy tales or, like, a dime store detective novel.
She wrote down a literal list of the structural elements. Underneath all the fantasy, the Golden Compass is just a collection of these core tropes.
Right.
You've got an orphan, a best friend kidnapped, a road trip, a hidden identity, a secret baby, a lost heir, a MacGuffin.
Which is just an object that every character in the story is desperately chasing.
Exactly. And a protector. It just so happens that the protector in Philip Pullman's universe is a giant, talking, armored polar bear.
Right.
But structurally.
Right.
Mechanically, that bear is doing the exact same narrative job as the gruff, retired cop protecting the young witness in a gritty thriller.
Which is such an illuminating way to look at genre. It perfectly illustrates the point that the magic of storytelling is rarely in inventing completely unprecedented alien concepts.
Right, because if it's too alien.
Exactly. If you invent a concept or a character dynamic so entirely foreign that no human being recognizes it, the audience has no emotional anchor. They just drift away.
Yeah, they tap out.
The real magic is in taking universally understood conventions, those core tropes, and dressing them up in unique, compelling, highly specific details.
So to push back a little on the literary snobs out there who might still argue that relying on tropes is just a cheap trick for hack writers,
Oh, there are plenty of them.
my analogy would be this. Tropes are basically musical chords, right?
No, I like that.
If you look at the history of popular music, millions of hit songs use the exact same C major chord. It is everywhere.
Everywhere.
But nobody listens to a Beatles song and says, ugh, a C major chord. What a lazy cliche. I've heard that a million times.
Right.
It's an essential building block of Western music. It's not about the chord itself. It's all about the melody, the rhythm, and the emotional resonance you layer over that chord.
I think that is a flawless analogy. You simply cannot write a symphony without chords, and you cannot write a compelling narrative without tropes.
Exactly.
They are the structural landmarks that subconsciously tell the reader, trust me, relax, I know how to tell you a story.
Okay, so if tropes are the raw materials, if they're the C major chords of our story, how do we actually make them play music? Because a pile of raw materials sitting in a driveway doesn't miraculously assemble itself into a house.
Nope.
We need an engine. Something has to drive these tropes forward, or else they just sit there doing nothing.
And that brings us to the absolute bedrock of narrative structure, the Holy Trinity of storytelling: goal, motivation, and conflict.
Ah, GMC.
For GMC, as it's abbreviated in the industry, Hilt is uncompromising on this point. Your clever tropes absolutely cannot work without this foundation.
Right.
You can have the coolest armored polar bear in the world, but if you don't know what is driving that bear, you cannot use the trope to its full potential. The story will stall out.
Let's break those 3 pillars down, because at first glance they sound incredibly simple.
They do.
But the source material goes deep into why they are actually rigorously demanding. Let's start with the goal. The golden rule here is that a character's goal must be meaningful, and above all, it must be measurable.
Measurable is the crucial word there. It is the most common place where a story falls apart.
Really?
Oh yeah. A writer will sit down and say, well, my protagonist's goal is to be happy. Or their goal is to find true love and inner peace.
Right.
Structurally, that is a nightmare. It doesn't work, because how do you objectively measure happy? When does the story actually end?
You can't.
Exactly. A narrative goal must be a quantifiable physical milestone so that by the climax of the story, the audience knows definitively, without any ambiguity, whether the character succeeded or failed.
Right. It has to be a concrete task. Finding a specific killer before midnight. Saving the family farm from foreclosure by raising $50,000.
Escaping from a maximum security prison.
Yeah, you either do it or you don't.
Think about Andy Weir's The Martian, both the book and the film adaptation. It is a masterclass in GMC.
Oh, totally.
Mark Watney's goal is as measurable as it gets. Get back to Earth.
Very binary. You are either marooned on Mars or you are back on Earth. There is no murky middle ground.
Exactly. And that leads us to the second pillar, motivation. This is the why.
The why.
Why does the character want to achieve this specific goal? Why are they willing to suffer for it? Hilt points out that the most powerful resonant motivations are always rooted in primal human emotions.
Like survival.
Survival, love, freedom, shame, revenge, justice. These are emotional frequencies that every single human being on the planet understands implicitly. Mark Watney wants to get back to Earth because his primal motivation is survival.
Yeah.
He wants to live.
Which brings us to the final and perhaps most important pillar, conflict. The source material defines this so beautifully and simply. Conflict is the opposite of the goal.
Yes.
It is the exact thing or person or environment that makes life excruciatingly difficult for the character. It is the friction that creates risk.
If the goal is what the character desperately wants, the conflict is how incredibly, almost sadistically hard the storyteller can make it for them to get it. And here is the slightly twisted truth about being a storyteller, or even just being an engaged audience member. We want life to be an absolute nightmare for these characters.
We really do.
We demand it, because without terrible difficulty, there is no thrill, and there is no revelation of character.
The book uses Jurassic Park to explain this concept, and the hypothetical scenario she paints is hilarious. Imagine Jurassic Park without conflict.
Okay.
John Hammond builds the park. The scientists successfully bring the dinosaurs back to life. But in this version, the dinosaurs are perfectly docile.
Just giant cows.
Right. They act like giant cows. They coexist peacefully with the human handlers. The security fences work flawlessly.
Boring.
The tour group arrives. They look at the friendly Brachiosaurus. They buy a T-shirt in the gift shop, and they go home. The end.
A total snooze fest. It's a brochure, not a story.
Exactly.
The conflict, the catastrophic power failure, the corporate espionage by Dennis Nedry, the terrifying predatory nature of the T-Rex and the raptors.
That is the engine.
That is the engine. The conflict is what forces the characters into extreme pressure. It exposes what they truly value, who they are willing to protect, and what they are willing to sacrifice.
Yeah.
Without the fences failing, Dr. Grant just remains a grumpy paleontologist who doesn't like kids. The conflict forces him to evolve into a protector.
Let's look at another brilliant example from the text, the television show Justified. Specifically, the dynamic centered around U.S. Marshal Raylan Givens.
Justified is phenomenal because it features incredibly complex, layered characters operating within a beautifully simple structural plot.
Right.
Raylan's goal in the pilot is highly measurable. Apprehend the charismatic criminal, Boyd Crowder. His motivation is primal, a deep, almost rigid sense of justice and duty.
But the conflict is where it gets fascinating. Because it's not just that Boyd has guns in a gang.
No.
The conflict is that Raylan and Boyd have a powerful shared history. They dug coal together when they were young men in Harlan County. They know each other's fathers. They are intrinsically linked by their upbringing. That shared history, That lingering affection wrapped in mutual antagonism is the emotional friction rubbing against Raylan's goal of arresting him. It makes pulling the trigger incredibly complicated.
Or take a very different tone with the dark comedy series Barry.
Oh, I love Barry.
You have a highly skilled, emotionally deadened hitman. He stumbles into an acting class, and his new measurable goal is to act on stage in a local Los Angeles theater production.
Which is so funny.
Right, and his motivation is a desperate desire for connection, a desire to leave his dark past behind and be a normal person.
But the conflict is twofold.
Mm-hmm.
It's internal and external.
Yeah.
He wants to immerse himself in this bright, optimistic community of actors, but his deadly skill set, his violent obligations to his handlers, and his own ingrained professional pride as an assassin keep violently pulling him back into the underworld.
Right.
The engine is constantly revving, tearing him in two different directions.
And what's crucial to understand here is that the tropes themselves fuel this conflict. The hitman with a heart of gold trope collides with the fish out of water place trope of the acting class.
Wait, I have a fundamental question about the mechanics of this engine.
Sure.
Can a character's goal change mid-story? Or is that a violation of the contract with the audience? Like, if you pitch me a movie about a desperate guy trying to rob a bank, and halfway through the second act he decides, you know what, crime is bad, I just want to open a quiet little bakery.
Right.
Doesn't that break the story? Doesn't the audience feel cheated?
It absolutely ruins the story if the change is random or unearned. But if it is structurally earned, goals not only can change, they often must evolve as the character faces new, escalating challenges.
Okay, how so?
Hilt points out that human beings are complex, and characters should be too. A very common narrative mechanism is that a character gets exactly what they thought they wanted. They successfully rob the bank, they get the millions of dollars.
Only to experience a hollow realization.
Precisely. The be careful what you wish for moment. They realized the money didn't fix their internal emptiness. It didn't bring their family back.
Okay.
So the character is forced to level up to a new, more emotionally resonant goal. The external goal shifts because the internal motivation has been altered by the severe conflict they just survived. They rob the bank, realize it was a mistake, and the new goal becomes returning the money without getting caught to save their soul. The engine just shifts gears.
Okay, that makes total sense. So the engine is humming. We have our goal, motivation, and conflict acting as the pistons, propelling the character forward. So now, how do we organize the massive, sprawling toolkit of tropes to actually build the chassis of the car around that engine?
Right, because it's a huge toolkit.
Exactly. If you just look at a list of 1,000 tropes online, it is paralyzing. Which brings us to Hilt's organizational brilliance, slicing the tropes 3 ways.
This is where Hilt's background in linguistics really shines. She talks about how, as a kid, she spent years obsessively diagramming sentences on a chalkboard.
Identifying the subject, the verb.
Right, the direct object, the prepositional phrases. And she applies that exact same rigid organizational logic to tropes, so they don't feel like just a chaotic, overwhelming list of storytelling cliches. She categorizes them into 3 distinct frameworks.
Let's walk through them. Framework number 1 is degree. This is categorizing tropes as either primary or secondary.
I like to think of this as a narrative volume control.
Oh, I like that.
Primary tropes are the loud ones. They drive the main plot. They're the absolute mainstay of the protagonist's character development. If you remove the primary trope, the story ceases to exist.
And the secondary.
Secondary tropes are the quieter frequencies. They boost the B storylines, the subplots. They pop in to add flavor, texture, and complication, but they don't hijack the main narrative thrust.
If we jump back to the Golden Compass for a second, the primary tropes driving that whole massive multi-book epic are the quest trope and the revenge trope, that the loud volume.
Yes.
But there is a secondary trope humming quietly in the background, the Secret Baby Trope, involving the main character's true parentage. It's there, it fundamentally changes the emotional landscape when it's revealed, but Lyra, the main character, wouldn't say her main everyday objective is dealing with being a secret baby. Her objective is the quest.
Exactly. The secondary trope supports the primary trope. Then you have framework number 2, which is type. This is literally breaking tropes down into parts of speech. Nouns. Specifically, person, place, or object.
Let's expand on these because this is where the toolkit gets really fun. The person tropes are your human archetypes. The billionaire, the loner, the orphan, the grumpy detective, the sunny optimist, the protector.
And let's look at why something like the billionaire trope is so enduringly popular across multiple genres. Why do writers use it? It's not just about fancy cars.
Right.
Structurally, making a character a billionaire removes all logistical and financial conflict. They can fly a helicopter anywhere, they can buy any company, they don't worry about rent.
So what's the point?
By removing the everyday survival conflict, the writer forces the character to confront their internal emotional bankruptcy. Infinite wealth cannot buy the specific thing they actually need, which makes their emotional failure even more pronounced.
That is a fascinating way to look at it. So those are the person tropes. Then you have the place tropes. These are the settings that are inherently designed to cause friction. Forced proximity, the claustrophobic small town, the cross-country road trip, being stranded on a desert island.
A small town trope is brilliant because it removes anonymity. In a sprawling city, a character can hide. In a small town, every action is observed, judged, and remembered. The setting itself acts as an antagonist.
And finally, the object tropes. These are the literal physical things driving the action. A MacGuffin, which could be a stolen flash drive or a magical ring, an arranged marriage contract, a ticking bomb, or even a physical identifying scar on a character's face.
Hilt gives a brilliant, mundane example of how you can take a person trope and use a place trope to elevate a completely boring scenario into high-stakes drama.
Okay, let's hear it.
Consider the act of getting an oil change for your car. There is zero inherent conflict in getting an oil change.
None at all. It's the definition of tedium. You were just sitting in a mildly smelling waiting room, drinking terrible coffee, reading a magazine from 3 years ago about celebrity diets.
Right. It's a dead scene. But what if we apply some tropes? What if the car breaks down and requires a mandatory oil change, while our two protagonists, who are currently operating under the enemies to lovers person trope,
Hey, boy.
are on a strict ticking clock deadline to get across the state to stop a wedding?
The tension instantly skyrockets.
Or even more extreme, what if the getaway car breaks down during the escape from a violent bank heist, and the heavily armed robbers have to pull into a suburban Jiffy Lube and pretend to be normal customers while the police sirens wail in the distance?
That's amazing.
Suddenly, that mundane location becomes a terrifying, high-conflict setting trope. You've introduced a ticking time bomb into a waiting room. The environment hasn't changed, but the tropes applied to the characters inside it transform it entirely.
Okay, let me unpack this with my own analogy, tying it back to her linguistics background. Grouping tropes like this is literally like diagramming a sentence.
Yeah.
The person trope is the subject of the sentence. The object trope is the prop they are physically holding in their hand. And the place trope is the stage they are forced to stand on while holding it. You mix and match those three specific variables, and you can mathematically generate infinite, highly dramatic scenarios.
That is beautifully summarized. And that leads to the final third framework, which is role. When a trope enters the story, what role is it playing? Is it a secret-based trope, or is it a change-based trope?
Secret-based tropes are things like blackmail, a hidden identity, a character living in disguise, or a buried crime from the past.
And from a structural standpoint, characters with dark secrets are an absolute gift to a storyteller. A character with a secret is instantly, intensely motivated to protect that secret.
Right.
They want to keep their past hidden, and they will risk everything, their reputation, their marriage, their freedom, sometimes even their life, for concealment. The tension is baked right into the premise. It's a genie desperate to get out of the bottle, and the audience is just waiting for the cork to pop.
And then you have change-based tropes, which force the character to undergo metamorphosis. The classic enemies to lovers, the ugly duckling physical or emotional transformation, or a profound redemption arc.
Yes.
The foundational rule of a change-based trope is that the character cannot end the story as the same person they started as. The events must reshape their psychology.
So when you look at all of these categories, person, place, object, primary, secondary, secrets, and changes, you start to see the immense flexibility of the system.
But out of all these thousands of categories and combinations, there is one specific trope that the author believes rules them all. It is her absolute favorite narrative device across every single genre.
It really is.
And I have to admit, when I first read this in the book, it completely blew my mind because I thought it was a joke. The undisputed king of all tropes is the Secret Baby.
The Secret Baby. I know, it sounds almost comical when you first say it out loud in a serious analytical context.
It really does. When you say Secret Baby, my brain immediately defaults to a very specific aesthetic. I think of a daytime soap opera from 1988.
Right.
Soft focus lighting, someone in shoulder pads dramatically gasping and fainting onto a velvet couch. Ominous organ music swelling in the background. Alejandro, the child is yours.
You're thinking of General Hospital or Dynasty or Days of Our Lives. And you aren't wrong. Those shows utilize the trope relentlessly. But Hilt makes a fiercely intelligent structural argument for why this specific trope is so incredibly universally powerful. She calls it a twofer.
A twofer.
Yes. It is two massive tropes fused into one narrative nuclear bomb.
Okay, let's deconstruct the twofer. Why is it a nuclear bomb?
First, you have the secret. As we just discussed in the previous framework, any character harboring a massive secret is a highly, almost dangerously motivated character.
Right.
They are actively deceiving the people around them. They're living a double life. The tension is inherently built in because the audience knows the truth, but the other characters don't. It's classic dramatic irony.
And second, you have the baby, or more broadly, the dependent offspring. This introduces an unplanned, massive, physical complication into the character's life. A baby requires care, resources, and protection. It creates an immediate, visceral vulnerability.
Exactly. But here is the real, deeper insight from Hilt's analysis. The true power of the secret baby trope isn't actually the physical infant sitting in a crib. It's the reveal.
The reveal.
It's the leverage. The power of the trope is entirely about the flow of information. It's about who knows what, when they find out, and how that devastating knowledge is weaponized against the protagonist. The conflict exponentially builds as different factions attempt to conceal, expose, or exploit the truth of the child's lineage.
And once you wrap your head around that, once you stop looking for literal crying infants in literal cribs, you realize this trope is everywhere. It is completely, ruthlessly versatile. Yes, it's the driving force in Bridgerton, which is historical romance where lineage dictates social survival. But it's also a foundational pillar in The Expanse, which is hard, gritty, political sci-fi. In The Expanse, the secret baby trope is fulfilled by a surly, dangerous teenage terrorist.
Exactly. The structural mechanics are identical. It's in Star Wars. Think about the original trilogy. Luke Skywalker is essentially the ultimate secret baby of Darth Vader.
Oh my God. He is.
The entire narrative pivot of The Empire Strikes Back, arguably the most famous plot twist in cinematic history, is the reveal of the secret baby trope. Vader realizes the child he thought died with Padme is alive, and it completely alters his motivation.
Yeah.
He goes from wanting to crush the rebellion to wanting to recruit his son to overthrow the Emperor. The secret baby creates massive political and emotional leverage. It's also the driving force in the gritty, depressing mystery series Mare of Easttown, which we will definitely dissect in detail later.
Oh, wait, I have to play devil's advocate here because I'm still a little hung up on the soap opera comparison.
Okay.
Isn't a secret baby inherently melodramatic? Like, how does a grounded, scientifically rigorous sci-fi show like The Expanse or a dark, violent crime show get away with using a daytime soap opera trope without the audience rolling their eyes and feeling like the writer took a cheap shortcut?
That question strikes at the core lesson of Hilt's entire book. The trope itself is neutral. The trope has no tone. The execution determines the tone.
Execution.
Right. A secret baby deployed in a soap opera is used for romantic melodrama, jealous rivalries, and dramatic slaps across the face. A secret baby deployed in a galactic space opera is treated as a biological MacGuffin with immense political, genetic, and military leverage. The trope is just the engine. The genre dictates the chassis, the paint job, and the tires you build around it.
Wow. Okay, that is a paradigm shift.
Yeah.
So speaking of genres with very specific rules and expectations, let's look at how tropes behave when the guardrails are incredibly rigid. Let's examine the oldest, most profitable, and most strictly governed trope playground of them all, romance.
Romance is a fascinating genre to study structurally because it has the strictest, most uncompromising contract with the reader of any publishing category.
Right.
If you write a thriller, the hero might die. If you write horror, everyone might die. But romance has an ironclad law.
The HEA.
The HEA, happily ever after, or at the very least the HFN, happy for now. If you are writing, publishing, or consuming a book categorized as a true romance, that is the unbreakable rule. The two main characters must overcome their obstacles and end up together in a committed, optimistic resolution.
No exceptions.
No exceptions. If they don't, you haven't written a romance, you've written a tragedy or general fiction.
Which, as a storyteller, present a massive structural problem, right?
Yeah.
If the audience already knows the final destination before they even open to page 1, how on earth do you keep them engaged for 300 pages? How do you create suspense when the ending is guaranteed?
That is exactly why tropes are the absolute lifeblood of the romance genre. Because the destination is known, the journey, the specific deployment of the tropes must provide extreme, agonizing emotional highs and lows.
Right.
The escapism for a romance reader isn't about answering the question of if the couple will get together. The escapism is strapping into the emotional roller coaster of how they will possibly overcome these seemingly insurmountable internal and external obstacles to get there.
The source uses Jane Austen's Pride and Prejudice to illustrate this structural mastery, which is brilliant because it proves these mechanics aren't a modern invention. This book has been in print for over 200 years.
Oh, yeah.
It has been adapted into serious BBC miniseries. It inspired Bridget Jones's Diary. It's been mashed up into Pride and Prejudice and Zombies. It completely transcends culture, language, and time. And why? Because Austen wasn't just a great prose stylist. She was an absolute, undisputed master at stacking and layering tropes to create unbearable tension.
Let's map the specific tropes in Pride and Prejudice using Hilt's frameworks, just to see how mathematically dense it is.
Okay, let's do the autopsy on Jane Austen.
First, we look at the primary person tropes. You have Elizabeth Bennet and Mr. Darcy. The overarching dominant trope governing their entire dynamic is enemies to lovers.
Right.
They meet, they mutually misunderstand each other, and they dislike each other instantly. Elizabeth thinks Darcy is a snob. Darcy thinks Elizabeth is beneath his station. Darcy is also operating as the classic billionaire trope.
Or the 19th century landowning equivalent?
Exactly. He is ridiculously wealthy, profoundly arrogant, accustomed to obedience, and highly attractive.
So the primary tropes are loudly driving the main conflict. But then you have the secondary tropes operating in the background, constantly adding friction and complicating their path to the HEA.
Yes.
You have blackmail. Mr. Wickham is essentially holding the reputation of Darcy's underage sister hostage, which ultimately reveals Darcy's hidden role not as an arrogant snob, but as a fierce protector. You also have the best friend trope with Charlotte Lucas.
And Charlotte's role is crucial structurally. Her highly pragmatic, entirely unromantic approach to an arranged marriage provides a stark thematic contrast to Elizabeth's idealistic demands for true love. It isolates Elizabeth, making her goal harder to achieve.
But the real magic is how Austen deploys place tropes. She uses forced proximity like a weapon to turn up the heat on the enemies to lovers dynamic.
She traps them together constantly. Darcy is a wealthy urbanite who is forced to stay in the rural country, an environment that makes him physically uncomfortable, defensive, and prone to acting arrogant.
Yeah.
The setting creates a misunderstanding. And then later, Elizabeth is forced to trudge through the mud to nurse her sick sister at the Bingley estate, which puts her under the same roof in direct, prolonged, forced proximity with Mr. Darcy. They cannot escape each other. They are forced into parlors and drawing rooms to verbally spar.
Let's analyze that specific dynamic, because this brings up a huge question for me. Think about Darcy's first proposal to Elizabeth. It is a disaster. It is humiliating, insulting, and heartbreaking.
Oh, it's brutal.
If the audience already knows, because of the genre contract, that they end up happily married, why do we want to suffer through the absolute lowest lows of their journey? Why do we actively enjoy watching Elizabeth be humiliated or seeing Darcy's pride get brutally rejected?
Because the audience wants to safely test their own emotional boundaries. Think about the psychology of reading. Tropes like enemies to lovers, the love triangle, or forbidden love, allow a reader to experience the searing adrenaline, the agonizing vulnerability, and the devastation of high-stakes romantic risk, but without any real-world consequences.
Wow.
We want to feel the sheer agony of the misunderstanding. We want the secondhand embarrassment of the terrible proposal. Because the deeper the wound, the more satisfying the healing. We need the suffering so that the relief of the final resolution feels earned.
It's like emotional bungee jumping.
Yeah.
You know the cord is securely attached. You know the happily ever after is going to catch you at the bottom before you hit the ground. But the sheer terror of the free fall still gets your heart rate up to 140 beats a minute.
That is precisely it. The tropes provide the gravitational pull for the fall. Without the extreme friction of the tropes, the characters just hold hands in chapter 2, and the book is over.
Okay, so while the romance genre promises a guaranteed happy ending, our next genre promises something completely different. It promises a solution to a puzzle.
Right.
But as we'll see, the mechanics of this genre might actually make you root for the bad guy along the way. Let's move out of the drawing room and into the shadows. Section 6, Mystery, Thriller, and Suspense. The Art of the Antagonist.
If romance demands a happily ever after to fulfill its contract, the mystery and thriller genres have their own equally unbreakable rule. The main story question posed at the inciting incident of the narrative, like who brutally murdered the victim in the locked room, Will the detective find the ticking bomb before it detonates? Will the protagonist survive the assassin?
Yeah.
That central question must be definitively answered by the final page or the final frame.
No cliffhangers allowed for the main plot. You can leave a minor subplot dangling to set up a sequel, or leave a thematic question open. But if you roll the credits and you don't reveal who the killer was, the audience will literally riot. They will demand a refund.
They absolutely will, because you broke the fundamental promise of the genre. The reader trades their time and anxiety for the intellectual satisfaction of the solution. But to make that journey to the truth compelling, you need friction. You need obstacles. And in this genre, the greatest, most vital source of friction is a brilliant, terrifying antagonist.
Hilt spends a massive portion of the book on this concept. She essentially argues a structural law, that your protagonist is only as capable and only as interesting as your antagonist forces them to be.
It's the law of opposing forces. Structurally, the antagonist's goal must be directly, diametrically opposed to the protagonist's goal. If the detective wants to uncover the truth, the antagonist wants to bury it. And the antagonist's actions must make life excruciatingly difficult for the hero. This creates a relentless push and pull. And what we've seen evolve over the last few decades is the massive rise of the anti-hero, or the highly capable, hyper-competent, and distressingly likable villain.
We also need to talk about the structural necessity of red herrings, the false suspect.
Yes. Red herrings are crucial structural tools because they misdirect both the audience and the protagonist. They act as narrative friction.
Right.
They waste the detective's valuable time, which allows the real antagonist to keep operating in the shadows, escalating their crimes and raising the stakes. But red herrings also serve a psychological purpose. They structurally isolate the protagonist. By chasing false leads, the detective starts to look foolish, paranoid, or reckless to their superiors, which eventually forces them to surrender their badge and go rogue.
Let's look at the specific examples Hilt provides to illustrate the brilliant antagonist, starting with the television show Killing Eve. This show is an absolute masterclass in the antagonist trope. You have Eve Pilastri, the bored, desk-bound MI6 agent, and Villanelle, the flamboyant, psychopathic, Russian-trained assassin.
Their entire dynamic is built on a towering stack of tropes. You have the loner trope, the normalization of extreme violence, characters carrying immense physical and emotional scars, the gay-for-you trope, and a deeply twisted version of enemies to lovers.
But let's dig into the psychology.
Yeah.
Why do we as an audience genuinely like Villanelle? She is a literal murderer. She kills innocent people horribly.
Yeah.
By all rights, we should despise her and want Eve to just shoot her in the pilot episode.
Because the writers gave Villanelle compelling motivations, exquisite taste, and deeply relatable human flaws. She is a ruthless killer, yes, but she is also a perfectionist. She takes pride in her craft.
And she's funny.
Exactly. She gets bored easily. She has a petulant, almost childlike sense of humor. Think about the scene where she wears a massive, fluffy, pink tulle ball gown to a mandatory psychiatric evaluation just to mock her handlers.
Yeah.
She bypasses all the social rules that constrain normal people, which is intensely liberating to watch. And crucially, as the series progresses, she occasionally flips roles and acts as a brutal protector to Eve.
The push and pull between them is intoxicating. Their goals are mutually exclusive. Eve's job is to arrest or kill Villanelle. Villanelle's job is to evade or kill Eve. But their psychological obsession with each other makes them inseparable.
Now let's apply the GMC framework to another iconic action-heavy thriller, John Wick.
Oh, man. A movie I could watch 100 times and never get bored.
Let's run the diagnostic. What is the goal, motivation, and conflict driving John Wick?
Okay. The goal is brutally measurable. Kill the men who broke into his house and stole his vintage car. But if you look deeper, the motivation is what elevates it from a standard action movie. The motivation is profound grief and revenge. But not just generic revenge. The thieves didn't just steal a car. They killed the beagle puppy that his recently deceased wife arranged to be delivered to him after her funeral. The puppy was his last tether to his humanity, his last symbol of hope for a normal life. So the motivation is deeply primal. He isn't avenging a car. He's avenging his dead wife's love.
Exactly. The emotional stakes are astronomically high. And the conflict, the specific, excruciating obstacle. The thief who killed the puppy happens to be the arrogant son of Viggo Tarasov, a powerful, ruthless Russian mob boss who used to be John's primary employer.
The tropes deployed in John Wick are phenomenal. The arrogant son is essentially a living, breathing MacGuffin that John is relentlessly chasing across the neon-lit landscape of New York City. And the world-building relies heavily on a brilliant place trope, The Continental Hotel.
Ah, the hotel for assassins. Let's analyze why that setting works so well.
It acts as a return to hometown trope for John, because he is re-entering the underworld he left behind. But it is also a massive forced proximity stage. The hotel has an ironclad rule. Absolutely no business, no killing can be conducted on company grounds.
Right.
So you have a building filled with heavily armed rival assassins who want to kill each other, forced to sit at the bar and sip bourbon civilly. The tension is incredible. The location literally functions as a character imposing its will on the protagonist.
And returning to the concept of the brilliant antagonist, Vigo is the perfect foil for John. Vigo isn't a mindless thug. Vigo understands exactly how lethal John is. Vigo's absolute paralyzing fear of John Wick is what elevates John from a retired hitman into a mythological boogeyman for the audience.
Yeah.
Vigo's reactions tell us how scared we should be. We see a similar dynamic with a highly capable, complex antagonist in the British series Luther, featuring Idris Elba and Ruth Wilson as Alice Morgan.
Alice Morgan is terrifying. She is a literal genius who murders her own parents in the first episode and completely outsmarts the police.
But the trope twist is that instead of just fleeing, she becomes fiercely, inexplicably loyal to Detective Luther. She recognizes a shared darkness in him. She becomes his dark mirror, often risking her own life or committing further crimes to protect him from red tape or other villains.
So if I'm stepping back and looking at the big picture of the thriller genre, the antagonist isn't just a physical hurdle for the hero to jump over so they can win a medal. They are the psychological mirror reflecting the protagonist's own deepest flaws and suppressed desires. Eve Calastri is bored by her safe life. She secretly needs Villanelle's chaos to feel alive.
Exactly.
John Wick's grief is so vast that he secretly needs Vigo's massive criminal empire to stand in his way, just so he has an excuse to return to the violent nature he tried to repress.
That is the psychological truth of the genre. If the antagonist is stupid or weak or easily defeated in the first act, the protagonist hasn't truly been tested. Their skills haven't been validated, and the audience hasn't been entertained. The monster must be terrifying to make the knight look brave.
But, having said all that about violence and chaos, not all mysteries require a heavily armed Russian mobster or an MI6 assassin in a pink ball gown or a trail of bloody bodies. Sometimes the body drops very quietly at a polite afternoon tea party.
True.
Which brings us to a fascinating subgenre study. Section 7, Cozy Mysteries versus Police Procedurals. A Tale of Two Corpses.
This is one of the most brilliant juxtapositions in Hilt's analysis because it clearly demonstrates how the exact same core narrative concept, a murder has occurred and someone must solve it, can be executed using entirely different trope toolkits based purely on the expectations of the specific subgenre.
Let's contrast them directly, starting with a cozy mystery. If I pick up a book with a cartoon cat and a teapot on the cover, what are the unbreakable rules?
In a cozy mystery, the aesthetic is safety wrapped around a puzzle. You will never ever see on-screen gore. The actual act of murder happens off-page. The sleuth investigating the crime is almost always an amateur, a small-town baker, a quirky librarian, a retired schoolteacher who notices things the police miss. Yeah. There is absolutely no explicit sex and no heavy profanity. The setting is usually an idyllic, enclosed, highly social, small community, and crucially, structurally, the victim is very often highly unlikable.
Right. The victim is never an innocent child. The victim is the greedy landlord threatening to tear down the historic bakery, or the local blackmailer who knows everyone's secrets, or a cruel bully.
And that is a deliberate psychological choice by the author. Because in a cozy mystery, the victim functions as an object, a puzzle piece to kick off the plot, rather than a profound, devastating human tragedy. Their death is the catalyst that allows the amateur sleuth to snoop around, uncover minor town secrets, and eventually restore moral balance to the community. The reader is invited to solve a crossword puzzle, not to mourn a life.
Whereas if you swing the pendulum to the absolute other end of the spectrum, you have the gritty police procedural.
A completely opposite trope set. The protagonist in a procedural is not a cheerful baker. They were usually a deeply depressed loner with a profound history of trauma. They have terrible, fractured personal relationships. They self-medicate with alcohol, and their hygiene is often questionable.
Yeah.
They're usually fighting against a corrupt system or a short-tempered boss who is constantly threatening to take their badge and gun.
And the death is not a puzzle. The death is shown on screen. It's graphic, it's visceral, and it's gritty. Violence, drug use, and heavy profanity are expected elements of the world building.
Exactly. Let's look at the specific case studies Hilt uses for these two extremes. For the pinnacle of the cozy mystery, she uses Agatha Christie's absolute masterpiece, Murder on the Orient Express.
The ultimate classic. You have the brilliant, eccentric detective, Hercule Poirot, who is stuck on a luxury train that gets stopped in its tracks by a massive snow avalanche in the mountains, which is a perfect fusion of the forced proximity and stranded place tropes.
And the victim is an American art dealer named Ratchet, who is universally despised by everyone who interacts with him. He is rude, arrogant, and cruel. Poirot starts interviewing the passengers in the dining car, the grieving widow, the nervous doctor, the quiet valet, the Russian princess. And what does he find beneath their polite veneers?
Hidden identities everywhere. The valet isn't just a valet. He has a fatal medical diagnosis and nothing to lose. The quiet assistant is actually a failed lawyer. Every single passenger has a secret trope driving their motivation to lie to Poirot.
But the massive twist, the absolute masterclass in narrative misdirection that cemented Agatha Christie's legacy, is that there isn't one lone murderer hiding in the shadows. Everyone did it. All 12 passengers took turns stabbing the victim in the dark.
Wow.
Because the victim wasn't just a rude art dealer. He was actually a monster who had kidnapped and murdered a young girl, destroying a family that every single passenger on the train was secretly connected to.
Okay, wait. I have a major pushback here regarding the genre rules. Poirot figures all of this out. He solves the puzzle perfectly, but then he deliberately lets them all go. He concocts a fake story about a mysterious assassin fleeing into the snow to tell the local police. Doesn't that explicitly violate the cardinal genre rule we just talked about? The puzzle must be solved, the killer arrested, and justice served.
It's a great question, and what's fascinating here is how Christie manages to brilliantly subvert the trope while still completely honoring the psychological spirit of the genre. Poirot does solve the puzzle. He answers the who. The audience gets the deep intellectual satisfaction of the reveal. But then, Christie forces Poirot to redefine the concept of justice. Because the victim was a literal child murderer who escaped the legal system, Poirot decides the perpetrators have suffered enough trauma. By letting them go, he restores the moral balance of the universe, which is the ultimate true goal of the cozy mystery, even if he actively subverts the legal justice trope to do it.
Wow. He chooses moral order over legal order. Okay, now let's leave the luxury train and swing violently into the bleak world of the police procedural. Hilt uses the HBO limited series Mare of Easttown, starring Kate Winslet.
A phenomenal, devastatingly bleak procedural. Mare is a suspended, deeply grieving, exhausted detective. The scar trope is massive here, but it's an emotional scar. Her son recently died by suicide, and she is raising his young child while her family fractures around her. She lives in a dreary, economically depressed, working-class Pennsylvania town where she knows every single resident by their first name.
The community itself is gritty, the color palette is gray, the people are struggling with addiction and poverty, and the central mystery kicking off the plot is the brutal murder of a young teenage mother named Erin.
And this series is an absolute masterclass in twisting and weaponizing the secret baby trope to inflict maximum emotional damage.
Let's lay out the twist, because it is wild, and it perfectly illustrates your point about leverage.
Yeah.
Erin leaves behind an infant, but Mare discovers through DNA testing that the baby's father isn't Erin's volatile ex-boyfriend like everyone in town assumed. The baby actually belongs to the husband of Mare's own lifelong best friend.
Which is horrifying on a community level. It introduces a deeply disturbing, incestuous dynamic, as the husband was technically Erin's uncle by marriage. Mare arrests the husband, logically assuming he murdered Erin to cover up the statutory affair and the existence of the secret baby, which would have ruined his life.
But the twists aren't done. The engine keeps turning. The husband didn't kill her. He's taking the fall to protect someone else. The actual murderer was the best friend's young son, Erin's middle school-aged cousin. He found out about his father's affair, stole a gun to try and scare Erin away to protect his parents' marriage, and in a panic, the gun went off by accident.
Structurally, it is devastating. Look at how the tropes collide. Mare successfully solves the crime, answering the core genre question. But to deliver legal justice, she has to completely destroy her own best friend's family by marching into their home and arresting a sobbing child.
Yeah, it's brutal.
It is the absolute peak of procedural conflict. The tropes, the secret baby revealing the motive, the best friend trope creating the emotional stakes, and the claustrophobic small-town setting making the fallout inescapable are woven together so tightly that the tension for the audience is almost unbearable. It's a tragedy built perfectly out of tropes.
It's just brilliant architecture. Okay, let's take these very grounded, very human emotional conflicts and shoot them completely out of our atmosphere into the stars. Yeah. Our final category, Section 8, fantasy, sci-fi, and mashups, building entirely new worlds with old tropes.
When a writer moves into epic fantasy or hard sci-fi, they are taking on an immense additional burden as a storyteller. In a contemporary romance, you don't have to explain how a coffee shop works. The audience knows. But in sci-fi, the setting itself must act as a character, and the world is often deeply, intentionally unfamiliar to the audience. You are dealing with complex magic systems, bizarre alien races, alternate laws of physics, and massive political dynasties spanning galaxies.
So how do you keep the audience from getting completely lost, overwhelmed, or just emotionally alienated by all the weirdness?
Tropes. Tropes are the anchor. They create an immediate emotional bridge between a completely alien, intellectually dense concept and a recognizable, grounded human emotion. You have to balance heavy, imaginative world building with intense, deeply familiar character goals.
If we connect this back to our overarching theme, sci-fi is basically like playing a brand new video game on a completely alien, newly generated map with bizarre gravity and weird flora. But the controller in your hand, the tropes, still uses the exact same buttons for jump, run, and shoot that you've used since you were a kid. You instinctively know how to play the emotional game, even if the scenery outside the window is totally bizarre.
Exactly. Look at the massive fantasy series The Witcher. You are thrown into a complex, politically dense world full of mutated monster hunters, warring kingdoms, and intricate magic. But strip it down to the studs. Geralt is the classic loner protector person trope. Jennifer, the powerful sorceress, is driven by the physical scar trope and an intense emotional quest for motherhood. Ciri, the young princess, is the literal MacGuffin and the classic lost heir.
Right.
The television adaptation jumps wildly around in timelines, which can be disorienting, but because those primary character tropes are so incredibly strong and familiar, the viewer stays emotionally anchored to their journeys.
And then Hill talks about the sci-fi cult classic Farscape, which has this incredible mind-bending premise. You have a present-day human astronaut, John Creighton, who gets shot through a wormhole and is lost on the other side of the universe. His goal is simple and measurable: go home. His conflict: he's trapped on a living biological spaceship with a crew of escaped, highly dangerous alien prisoners who don't trust him.
And Hilt points out what she considers to be the absolute best, most efficient, meet-cute trope ever filmed in any genre.
Yes. The meet-cute is usually that sweet rom-com moment where the two leads reach for the same cup of coffee at a cafe and their hands touch. In Farscape, the meet-cute is delightfully violent. John wakes up dazed in an alien prison cell. He sees a humanoid figure in a spacesuit. He politely extends a hand to help her up, acting like a civilized human. She immediately attacks him, sweeps his legs, pins him to the ground with her crotch aggressively shoved in his face, and barks an interrogation at him, demanding his rank and regiment.
It is the ultimate hyper-compressed enemies to lovers kickoff. It subverts his expectations of first contact, it subverts our expectations of a romantic introduction, but it immediately, flawlessly establishes the power dynamic, the cultural friction, and the high-stakes conflict between them.
The source material also dives into the modern trend of mashups, fusing divergent genre rules together to create something that feels entirely fresh and groundbreaking, even though the component parts are very old.
Mashups are incredibly popular and effective right now. It's the alchemy of taking the familiar, comforting beats of one genre and violently injecting the tension of horror or the competitive pacing of a sports narrative.
A perfect example is Jordan Peele's Get Out. It starts structurally exactly like a standard, slightly awkward family drama trope. The nervous boyfriend going to the secluded country estate to meet the wealthy girlfriend's parents for the weekend. We've seen that a million times. But Peele mashes it up with visceral, racial, psychological horror. The familiar trope lulls you into a false sense of security before the trap closes.
Or look at the global phenomenon of Squid Game. You have a grim, dystopian setting highlighting economic inequality, mashed up with the clear, measurable tournament structure of a sports movie, mashed up with the brutal, gory stakes of survival horror. And at the center of all of these high-stakes sci-fi, fantasy, and mashup stories, you will almost always find one specific structural object trope doing the heaviest lifting to keep the plot moving: the ticking time bomb.
I noticed that. Let's really dig into the mechanics of the ticking time bomb. Why is it so necessary?
Because it ruthlessly compresses the storyline. Human beings naturally procrastinate. Characters will avoid conflict if you let them, whether the bomb is a literal asteroid hurtling toward Earth, an invading alien fleet that will arrive in exactly 48 hours, or the giant digital clock running out on a deadly playground game in Squid Game. It forces characters into corners.
Right.
When a character thinks they have a month to solve a problem, they act polite. They plot, they lie, they hide their true intentions. But when you tell a character they have 10 seconds left to live, they don't care about being polite anymore. They make desperate, impulsive, purely instinctual choices that expose their true primal nature. It maximizes emotional conflict in the shortest possible window of time. The mask comes off.
Okay, let's take a breath and unpack everything we've covered today. Because we have covered a massive amount of narrative ground. We've traveled from the polite, repressed drawing rooms of Pride and Prejudice to the cold, weird vacuum of space in Farscape. We've looked at billionaires, assassins, and amateur sleuths.
And the unifying common denominator through all of these wildly different stories is the architecture. Tropes, whether it's the weaponized secret baby, the excruciating tension of forced proximity, or the weary, traumatized loner detective, are not signs of a lazy writer running out of ideas.
Exactly.
They are the essential load-bearing gears of human storytelling. They are the psychological shorthand that connects the writer's imagination to the reader's empathy.
They provide the measurable goals and the intense friction that makes stories actually interesting. They establish the emotional stakes that make us scream at our televisions, and they deliver the deeply satisfying resolutions we inherently crave as human beings, no matter what genre we happen to be reading or watching. The twist, the specific, unique, character-driven details you layer on top of that ancient framework, that is what makes a story truly unforgettable.
Which is exactly why understanding them is so valuable. It elevates you from a passive consumer, just eating whatever content is put in front of you, to an active, engaged participant in the story. You start to appreciate the brilliant craft of the illusion, rather than just being tricked by it. You see the strings, and you respect the puppeteer even more.
So as we wrap up, I want to leave you, the listener, with a final, slightly provocative thought to mull over. We've spent this entire deep dive analyzing how these tropes govern fictional world and imaginary characters. But take a second and look at the architecture of your own life. Look at your daily routines. Are you currently stuck in a frustrating forced proximity trope at your workplace with a coworker you can't stand?
Oh, that's a great point.
Right. Are you harboring a deep personal secret that is secretly driving your underlying motivation for why you work so hard? Or why you avoid certain relationships?
It's an interesting psychological mirror. It's entirely possible that we are so deeply, hopelessly addicted to these narrative tropes in our media precisely because our own lives subconsciously follow these exact same structural patterns. We seek out the fiction to understand our reality.
You are the protagonist of your own narrative.
Yeah.
Your life isn't just a random series of cliches. It is a trope waiting for a brilliant twist. So look at your own X-ray. What is your ultimate goal? What is your primal motivation? What is your biggest conflict? And what trope are you going to deploy to get what you want?
Keep your eyes open. The Matrix is everywhere.
Thank you so much for joining us on this deep dive. The next time you hit play on Netflix or turn the first page of a new novel, look for the gears turning in the background. We'll see you next time.